Right near or around Anderson Learning Commons was where the middle school was, and we had a set of lockers and a set of classrooms over there. And then one thing that has changed is that there used to be what we called the pit, and the pit had risers, and that's where the boys came out to attend formation every day. They would sit along the risers. There was a level that was like a half level below where some classrooms were, and then they had this pit, and the boys loved to goof around there.
That was so special because at that age group, these kids they're never up very long, they're never down very long. There are times and you just got to pull them all together. And that pit, as we called it, was a perfect place. They were comfortable, they listened to you. We'd have speakers come in, talk to them about certain areas of that.
And the pit, I don't know, it just became very famous for, there were wrestling matches, there were talent shows, what it looked like was this almost like a hole in the ground or a pit that was, you know, carpeted and with risers.
Also the classrooms got to use it too for their activities in the classroom. I think when you are a teacher at that age level, you have to have different activities all the time because their interest, because right away they can only write so long, they can only read so long. They need to have a variety of things to make that class interesting. And so that area down there was just perfect for pulling things together. Even the high school found it pretty nice because they'd come down and try to use it. But then afterwards, like after school, was a great place for kids to just sit down and be comfortable. Instead of sitting in a classroom desk, they could sit there comfortably and do some reading and that. And of course, at the middle school, then somebody would bring a football in there or something like that. So we had, no, that's when somebody's going to get hurt because they're not paying attention. And so that way we had to kind of change. This is a place that's yours. Get together with a group and go over some things. Student council meeting or band program. So you could say we could use it for other things besides just their gathering things.
All their classes, all their lockers, everything they did was over on this side of the building. Very rarely did the middle school student take a class or attend anything up here.
Because some of our kids did well in math, and so they got moved up to the high school classes. Math was probably the #1. And then some got involved in languages, where instead of being in the basic, I'll say French class, they got moved up to French 2 or something like this. So that way the high school opened up the door, and then we just had to adjust their schedules so they could be up there. And so, especially in some of our activities, especially in the theater, and the kids got involved with the theater. We had some of our middle school plays ourselves, but then some of our kids got called in to do in the high school. And then they got to connect with the schools. The band program was another huge one. We had a separate band program, but pretty soon they were included a lot in the high school activities. But it was a great opportunity for our kids to get involved in these upper classes because they were doing so well in class. And you don't want to hold a young person back. You know, you can really see when they're getting bored because, oh, I know all this. Get you into a class where they're going to push you. I know Dave Bassett, our science teacher, he was so good about preparing the kids for experiments that they were going to do in school. He also established what they call a rocket club out here, which was huge, and used it part of his class. But at the end of the rocket club, after a semester, we'd go down to the football field and he'd shoot off these rockets with the kids. And the whole school just loved it. Even the high school tried to come down there. And it was an awesome experience. But the kids learned an awful lot by building their own rockets, understanding what ignited, what the purposes behind it. We started one program down there where we took the kids up to Camp Widgiewagon for a winter break. And it was a tremendous come together. We usually went up in like January and February. I remember one time we went up there and I think the temperature got 30 below zero. But it was an experience from cross-country skiing to understanding nature and seeing all the things. The people up there were awesome in gathering our kids and doing all these small groups. And then the final thing for the night before we left, they took a sauna, and then they cut a big huge hole in the lake, and they ran down from the sauna and jumped into the lake. Sometimes that's the one thing they remembered about the whole week, that sauna. But it was a great experience of pulling the kids together, and we talked about it for a long time. Science class especially, about nature. Camp Widgiewaga is way up in northern Minnesota, so it was a beautiful place.
Oh yeah, some of the stories that weren't so funny. In the middle of the winter, if there'd be a big power outage, there was no power. We had 110 boarders down there who had to be fed 2 or 3 times a day, and there was no power in the cafeteria. It was terrible. We sent as many home with daytime students as we could, and we just kind of made do for a week or so until power was back on and she could cook and they could eat. And there were other stories like that too, especially when there'd be winter storms and there wouldn't be any transportation. Well, the day students stayed home, and the boarders we had here had to feed them 3 times a day, that kind of thing. So it was kind of pioneer days, really roughing it out here. We had a station wagon, one of the 12 garages down there, number 11, was the border station wagon. I have to haul them around. They'd always want, let's hit the Burger King. So we'd go over to Robert Street, because there was nothing down here. And one time, we had coming from India, a border student, Anujai, and he got here after school started. Oh, and the kids were all excited. He was going to be a border student from India. And so I piled some kids in the station wagon. We went out to the airport to meet him, and he got off, nice little fellow, quiet, and we hardly got in the station wagon, and the border said, let's hit the Burger King. So I went over to Robert Street, and we went in, and they ordered their burgers and fries, and they were busy munching the burgers and eating the fries. And little Anujai was sitting there next to me. He was completely overwhelmed, and he finally nudged me and said, don't you use silverware in this country? But he ended up staying 4 years, graduating, going back to India.
It seemed like after every so many years, people started saying, hey, we need more space, we need this technology, what's it going to take? And then somebody look into it, well, you got to have this kind of a building. You got to do this type of thing to make it what we really want. And so that's when the new school was needed. And of course, the upper school was numbers are good, so we needed more space to get the kids involved in everything.
Middle school was growing, and they didn't have room enough for all their classes there. So they ended up with some 8th graders at least up in the high school and classrooms with 9th graders. It was kind of a bad situation, but it didn't last very long because they built that beautiful new 2-story